Welcome to On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Gerry Hamilton. Gerry, we got to say it, one word, chaos. That reigned supreme on Saturday. The Longhorns, not a part of that chaos, but suddenly a bunch of games that the Longhorns have now look a little bit more difficult, maybe, including, let's start with this one. Alabama goes down at the hands of Vanderbilt in Nashville on Saturday. What a win for Diego Pavia, Clark Lee, and the Vanderbilt Commodores. He looked like he's going to be difficult for the Longhorns to corral. It wasn't really, I mean, it may have been a fluke at some level, but Vanderbilt stepped up and made plays when they had to against Alabama. I didn't feel like it was a fluke. I felt like they played zone against Jalen Milroe all day and made him earn everything, and then actually scored some points against that Crimson Tide defense. It was an impressive performance by Vanderbilt, and it does start our Chaos Saturday discussion right here. What'd you think?
Yeah, well, I actually think it's Alabama's secondary that's going to be their biggest issue. That's 2 weeks in a row now. They've given up big plays in the secondary. After Beck stopped turning it over, after Georgia kind of solved that and Beck settled down. I mean, what did he throw for 400 yards in that game last week? Then Pavia, same for 250, which is a lot for Vanderbilt and what they were doing offensively. I think Alabama's secondary has issues right now. That's one of my takeaways from the last 2 weeks. And, my big thing was, and I don't know if it's a one Saturday thing, but if you didn't get off the field on third down defensively as a visiting team this week in the SEC, you were in trouble. It's very interesting to see, and I think it's awesome for Vanderbilt. Diego Pavia, we've been talking about this. He gives them the most hope since James Franklin was the coach. That's been a while now. So, but it was Alabama's going to have to solve their secondary. I mean, when you look at it on the surface, you score 35 on the road with 2 turnovers, a pick six, and a fumble on the Vandy side of the field. You would still say you probably win that game, but not giving up big plays in the passing game again.
It ain't Nick Saban's defense anymore. There, I would add this about Alabama. This sets up Texas to potentially jump to number 1 later today in the rankings. It really, really does. And we'll see what happens. Ohio State was another top-ranked team that was in action. Obviously, they throttled Iowa 35-7. Not a big look. The second big matchup in the SEC that caused upset and turmoil is also another team plays later, that Texas plays later, and that's Arkansas defeating Tennessee. Gerry, that was a odd game. Arkansas came out and dominated the first basically the first quarter and a half. Tennessee made a little bit of run but they went to halftime at 3-0 Arkansas, and then Tennessee came out, scored 14 straight points in the third quarter, only to have Arkansas then come back and score the final 16 points of the game. Now that matchup in Fayetteville for the Longhorns, where Texas we thought would be heavily favored, Fayetteville's a tough place to play. I hope it is the only UT that goes down in Fayetteville this year.
Yeah, again, it was almost the same thing early in that game. Tennessee couldn't get off the field on third down. Arkansas ran 44 plays in the first half to Tennessee's 25. That's a significant difference. And then, look, Nico looked like a young quarterback in that game to me, Bobby. I mean, the inaccuracy, held on to the ball too long. The last play of the game, you just kind of dumbfounded. There's 6 seconds left. There's 6 seconds left. They call a timeout, and you don't release the football. I mean, I don't know. That was a very inexperienced quarterback. But look, life in the SEC on the road. I mean, and by the way, we started with chaos. I think parity pushes chaos.
Yes,
and we're seeing it. The ranked teams on the road had real struggles in college football Saturday.
Yeah, let's add another one to it. The Aggies looked dominant. They returned Connor Wegman at quarterback, and A&M got on top of Missouri and never took the foot off the pedal. finishing it up, beating the Tigers 41-10. It was the largest ranked win by the Aggies in the school history, I believe, at this point, or at least of a top 10 team. What did you think of? I thought it was curious that they went back to Wegman over Marcel Reed, but I will say this: it opened up the Aggies' passing game considerably, and teams couldn't just stack up against the run, and that also seemed to help the Aggies' rushing attack on Saturday too.
Well, you pointed out something earlier, and we talked about it early in the year, how big of a drop-off would Missouri have on defense. And I think as the season moves along, it's going to be a lot is what's going to happen with that. But A&M's defensive front, look, if you can't block their defensive front, they're a tough team because Scourton's a first-round pick. Shamar Turner's going to be a second- or third-round type pick. They have players in their defensive front. They have a lot of players in their defensive front. But I thought, that was an interesting game because Missouri got jobbed on a couple of calls early, which A&M would have won the game, but it definitely just created an avalanche of momentum in that game. But one thing, my takeaway, and it's almost the same as Arkansas in a way, which we didn't talk about. Taylor Green's not an accurate quarterback. So if you have tight coverage, he throws the ball in pass breakup zones. With A&M, I think Connor Weigman had all day to throw the football in the pocket. And I think he's a long line of those quarterbacks in the country. If you give them a lot of time, they're going to be accurate passers. When you put pressure in their face, they're totally different quarterbacks in terms of accuracy. So it'll be Missouri just could not apply pressure in that game. But look, A&M is that's a solid win. But the biggest thing for A&M is no matter what happens to Missouri the rest of the way this year, is they now have the easiest schedule in the SEC, in my opinion. And I think Texas has one of the easier schedules too. Looks a little bit more difficult now. But, if you look at Mississippi State, at South Carolina, are your road games. You don't have Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, or Tennessee on the or Oklahoma on the schedule if you're A&M this year. That's a really favorable schedule from here on out. So they are CJ and I did a story about were they contenders or pretenders, and we said the winner of that game was a contender and the loser was a pretender. A&M's now a contender. I'm not saying they're going to win the league, but they're a contender because of their schedule.
Hey, they're leading. They're 3-0. They're first in the conference right now. Any way you look at it, they're next up. I think their next opponent is Mississippi State. So they're most likely going to be 4-0. Now they head to Starkville. We'll see how that goes. But my point being, I think that A&M right now has won 5 consecutive games. We'll see where this ends up for them.
I'll say this: after Saturday, if A&M's not 8-3 or 9-2 rolling into the Texas game, the A&M fan base will be disappointed because they right the ship after the bad showing against Notre Dame. They got a little bit of a roll here after yesterday. They're at Mississippi State, then LSU comes to town, and that schedule's really favorable. If they're not 8-3 or 9-2, when Texas rolls in to College Station, I think the A&M fan base will be disappointed.
Also need to mention this game in the SEC. Ole Miss takes care of South Carolina pretty cleanly, 27-3 in Columbia, South Carolina as well. Also around the country, a couple of others that bear some notice. Michigan losing to Washington. Michigan replaced quarterback Alex Orji after in the middle of the second quarter, mounted a comeback and actually went up 17-14 before losing 27-17. USC goes into Minnesota. That's right, into Minneapolis, and loses 24-17. So much for Miller Moss being a first-round pick, according to some other people. Some other scores
and Lincoln being an NFL head coach.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. He's probably not going to get that one. Iowa State took it to Baylor. Baylor actually jumped out on top of Iowa State, but then Iowa State just lowered the boom, winning 43-21. That's going to cause some issues in Waco. Dave Aranda now 2-4 and 0-3 in the Big 12 so far this year. Ashton Jeanty he may now be the official Heisman front runner since Jalen Milroe lost. Yeah, the running back out of Boise State rushed for 186 yards on just 13 carries. And then big one, I think, in Louisville. SMU
Yeah.
quietly, somewhat, 5-1 overall now, went up and beat Louisville 34-27. I expect SMU to be ranked come Sunday afternoon.
Hey, Bobby, this is actually an interesting topic. Are they the number 3 team in the future of college football in Texas because their NIL capabilities behind Texas and Texas A&M?
Could be. I mean, it could very well be. I mean, some people would say Texas Tech might have that because they have some well-heeled donors right now, very involved. But I would put SMU because they have a larger contingent of well-heeled donors, I would think.
And prospects within 50 miles of their school.
Yes, all of that. And probably a more desirable location for those guys to live. We'll see what that means and what it doesn't. A couple other things I wanted to ask you, Jerry, just, Texas and what the polls are going to say later today. Anything that I think Texas is probably going to be number 1. Ohio State probably number 2. Ohio State plays Oregon this coming weekend. So they could flip. I mean, and Texas obviously plays OU this coming weekend. I don't think it matters, but I think it's possible Texas ends up being number 1 again after this weekend.
No, I agree. They had stayed 1 in the coaches poll, went to 2 in the AP last week. I do think they'll bounce back up to 1 in the AP poll, but I think the first place votes may be close, right? I mean, because since Ohio State played and beat Iowa 35-7, no matter what people think of Iowa, Ohio State continues to beat people up that they're playing. So I think the first place votes may be close, but I do expect Texas to be number 1 and Ohio State to be 2. That also sets up because of the losses other people took. That sets on Saturday. That sets up the Ohio State-Oregon game as a top 5 matchup, more than likely when the polls come out. And that's where College Game Day will be. Oklahoma will probably be ranked around 17 or 18, up a couple spots without playing because people lost, depending on how much people moved down that lost on Saturday. So it sets up a top 20 matchup between Texas and Oklahoma. Georgia, obviously, I want to mention this. Georgia actually bounced back pretty well today from the loss to Bama. They didn't just go out and dominate Auburn, but Auburn's got big, fast athletes. They just have offensive issues. But that was a solid win for Georgia. And they then, I think, have what Mississippi State before they come to Austin. So that, again, for Georgia was a good bounce back win in a physical game, and they take care of business next week. Then they had the Austin for if Texas handles business against Oklahoma for a second straight top 5 matchup in college football.
Yeah, Georgia, I forgot to mention that Georgia beat Auburn 31-13. It was close at half, but Georgia really took control of that game in the third quarter, and Auburn could not convert in the red zone, really. That was the big deal, while Georgia had very little problem doing so when they got down there. All right, Jerry, I got to say this. Doesn't this mean that Texas has a little bit tougher schedule down the road? I mean, Arkansas is clearly a team to be reckoned with at home. Vanderbilt is now maybe the trap game of the season after Texas plays OU and Georgia back-to-back. They go to Nashville to take on Vanderbilt, a team that clearly is trying to get bowl eligible at this point. Does this look like A&M look better on Saturday? Does this make the SEC schedule look more vaunting or more, excuse me, not vaunting, but daunting at this point?
I think the road game at Arkansas, you already knew it'd be tough because it's Arkansas, right? And the hatred and the vitriol for Texas. Arkansas also has an off week before Texas. Texas does not. So we'll see, but we need to see what's up with Taylor Green's knee too, and how if he has any meniscus, what they say about him early in the week, because that could impact Arkansas the rest of the way. Definitely a tougher game. Obviously, Kentucky was idle this week, but they look tougher. Now they've kind of pulled it together a little bit at Vanderbilt, because of where that game is, being after Oklahoma and Georgia, as you pointed out. If that was if that was in between the Oklahoma and Georgia games, I mean, I don't know. But I think because Alabama beat Vanderbilt, that grabs everybody's attention. The problem for Texas is how beat up are you physically. It's hard for me to even talk about the November games after the first weekend in November. Once you get to the 9th, 16th, 23rd, 30 week, I think health is going to be so big in those games. I mean, like, it's almost hard to talk about those games because you got to see where everybody's at in November. But the one thing, my big takeaway, Bobby, from Saturday was there's chaos. I think a lot of it's due to parity. I think the home field means more now than ever because of parity. And, you have to find a way to bring it every week in the rent-a-player day and age of free agency, which I think is hard to do for coaching staffs, honestly.
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and the top 10, the guys that we're talking about here, Aggies beat the under. They were actually favored in the game by 2.5, but Aggies were ranked 25. Missouri ranked 10. Aggies at home. Washington dumped Michigan. Of course, Washington was at home. Arkansas dumped Tennessee. Tennessee was at home. Vanderbilt dumped Alabama. Yep. Vanderbilt was at home. So I get what you're saying. One thing I will also take away from this and say this, having gotten a chance to really watch everybody, the SEC games are highly, highly physical. Very, very physical runners. I don't know that Texas has that kind of running back right now on its roster. Not that's an upperclassman for sure.
Right.
And so I want to see what that means when Texas goes to Vanderbilt, when it goes and plays Georgia in a couple weeks, when Texas hosts Kentucky and Florida, because Florida now has won back on the winning side of things for a couple weeks. So look, I mean, I'm looking at this, and physically the next 7 games for the Longhorns are going to be a tall task. I'm not saying it's undoable. I'm just telling you, it's going to be some physical football going down in Austin and elsewhere that the Longhorns are involved in over the next 2 months.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, look, what people that have always kind of, whether it's us in recruiting that have worked nationally in that area, they're just bigger, faster athletes in the SEC. Yep. Bottom line, I mean, that there's more of those guys. Every team you play, look,
every team. I will also say this: every team misses tackles in the SEC because the other guys are pretty darn good with the ball in the hand.
Yeah,
that's like, even it happened last week to Texas against Mississippi State, but I sat there and watched Arkansas guys run through Tennessee tackles. I saw Vanderbilt run through Alabama tackles.
Yeah.
It's they got good ball carriers and talented athletes.
Well, I think the crazy thing is if you watch all the SEC games, A&M's got multiple draft picks on the D line. Georgia obviously does. Alabama does. The Alabama secondary is struggling. Auburn does. I mean, everywhere you look in the league, except maybe Vanderbilt, maybe this Missouri team up front has multiple future NFL draft picks on the defensive front to start before you even look at the linebackers in secondary.
Yeah. All right. That's going to do it for the rapid reaction from yesterday's football games. Jerry, we'll talk more about other games and other stuff going on later today. We've got the live stream coming up at 7:00, as well as another one right before NFL kickoff as well. For Gerry Hamilton and our producer, Matt Hutchison, I'm Bobby Burton. Hook 'em.